approximately 20 member organizations, 20 actively working on redistricting. The Asian American communities in New York are very culturally, linguistically, and geographically diverse. And that is intentionally reflected in our coalition on who we are. Our organizations serve many different communities, Bengali, Chinese, Filipino, Indo-Caribbean, Korean, Indian, Pakistani, Tibetan, and others throughout all 5 boroughs. And to date, we are the largest and most impactful redistricting coalition on the East Coast. Next slide. So everyone knows, and this slide is important because it's about redistricting and how it relates to power. I think the word is out that voting is important. Like the messaging, the branding on that nationally is pretty clear. But there's another very, very important point, which is voting by itself without other infrastructures in place actually isn't enough. And this is why. If you have a vote and on issues that you very much care about, and you're in a district where you do not have like-minded people, you can vote every single year on those issues for your entire life. And if you're not in a district with like-minded people, nothing is ever going to change. Your voice is never going to have any power. Voting in a way is like it's almost neutral, and then you need like this special magic solvent to give it the power, and that's actually redistricting. Because if you are in a district with like-minded people, then change actually happens. So voting isn't enough. You need voting with redistricting to actually have power, and that is the logic of why redistricting is so important. Next slide. So this is what our webinar will cover. There can be 3 main components of this. One is the listening and the learning portion. Another section is how to participate, and third, which is the most important of all, and hoping all of you will stay at the end, which is how you can get involved and take action yourself. So in the webinar, which we covered with other guests later, we'll go through different sections. Under listen, we'll cover the structure of Congress, why congressional districting is so important, the creation of New York State's independent redistricting commission and what the IRC has done to date, why the redistricting process must be open and transparent to the public, why APA communities of interest should be kept in the same congressional district, and then participate. We want to hear from you what reforms you think are needed to make the redistricting process truly independent, open, and transparent. And for the last section is action, how you can become involved in the efforts to reform the Independent Redistricting Commission. At this point, I'll hand it off to our next presenter, Lloyd.
Thanks, John. Hi, everybody. My name is Lloyd Fang from the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families, CACF. As John mentioned, we're here to talk about congressional redistricting, and so we're here to talk about the U.S. Congress. The U.S. Congress is composed of 2 legislative bodies, the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives. The U.S. Senate, of course, isn't part of our redistricting process because each state automatically gets 2 seats in the Senate, whereas the U.S. House of Representatives is based on population. And so we do undergo a redistricting process for that. So just going through this quickly, the function of this body is to make and pass federal laws, right? There are bills that then hopefully become legislation. The size of this body is 435 representatives divided by the 50 states based on population. So currently, New York State has 26 representatives. Each representative serves a full elected term of 2 years, and the requirements for each representative is to be at least 25 years old, a U.S. citizen of at least 7 years, and an inhabitant of the state that he, she, or they represents, and then 4 selected by direct election. So on the right-hand side, you can see the current makeup of the U.S. House of Representatives. Republicans currently hold the majority with 220 seats, Democrats in the minority with 213 seats, and there are 2 vacant seats. Next. So this brings us to the reapportionment process. Every decade, the US Census Bureau conducts the decennial census to count the total US population and then reports those numbers to the president, who then reports those numbers to Congress. Then Congress reports the number of people in each state to each governor. And then after that, each state's own legislature is tasked with redrawing the congressional districts based on their state's own redistricting law. Next.
Thanks, Lloyd. I'm Vishal Chander, and I'm a member of the Asian American Bar Association of New York City. Redistricting is important because redistricting defines who can vote for congressional representatives. When the redistricting process is abused, it can affect the power communities have in selecting their elected officials. Gerrymandering is the drawing of district lines for political gain, usually on partisan lines. Gerrymandering can be used to lock up power for incumbents, change district boundaries to eliminate incumbents or challengers, and dilute the votes of minority communities. Electoral districts determine how funding for healthcare, transportation, income security, education, job training, social services, community development, and environmental protection are distributed. Federal grants account for about 1/3 of total state government funding, and more than half of state government funding for healthcare and public assistance. The boundaries of your district can influence whether elected officials respond to your community needs. When a community is split up into multiple districts, communities can be unable to get elected officials to respond to community concerns or get funding to respond to community needs. Next slide, please. So redistricting is important because Congress decides a lot of important issues like foreign policy, and this includes how the United States is involved in international disputes, like the wars in Ukraine or in Israel-Palestine. Congress is also responsible for healthcare issues, like the Affordable Care Act, Medicaid expansion, and universal health care. Congress controls the purse, and it determines how much money each state gets. Your congressperson advocates for how much money your state and district get. Immigration reform. Congress is responsible for addressing issues at the border and passing comprehensive immigration reform. Congress regulates commerce. This includes the regulation of interstate business like banking, transportation, and international trade. Gun control. The legislation to address the regulation of legislation to address the regulation of guns and gun violence is also a responsibility of Congress. Congress is also crucial to the process of impeachment of officials of the United States, like the president or cabinet members. Next slide, please. An example of a congressional representative and the difference that they can make is New York Congresswoman Grace Meng. She was instrumental in passing the COVID Hate Crimes Act to combat anti-Asian hate, securing funding for Queens hospitals, advocacy organizations, and community centers, securing $120 million to upgrade Queens infrastructure to prevent flooding, securing a small business development center at Queens College, and sponsoring a bill to promote the teaching of Asian American history in schools. Next slide. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm Liz O'Young, coordinator of APA Voice Redistricting Task Force. So now you've learned how important redistricting is. So what I'm going to talk to you is New York's redistricting process. And you'll see as we go through this why there are some problems in the way in which New York redistricting process works. The commission, the Independent Redistricting Commission, was put in place in 2014 as a result of a referendum. And voters voted to create this 10-member Independent Redistricting Commission that New York State Legislature had basically agreed to. And in order for this process to become part of our Constitution, our New York State Constitution, voters have to vote on it. And so they voted for this process. And what it is basically is there's 10 people that sit on this commission. The Senate Majority Leader, which currently is Democrat, picks 2 of the commissioners. And then the Majority Assembly Leader, which also happens to be Democrat now, picks 2 of the commissioners. So that's 4. And then those 4 pick an independent commissioner that, most likely will align with their thinking. Then the other 5 commissioners, 2 are picked by the Senate Minority Leader, which is currently Republican. The Assembly Minority Leader then picks 2, and then those 4 pick an independent. So what you have is 5 democratically leaning commissioners, and then 5 Republican leaning commissioners on this commission. Next slide. So this is important, and I asked you to I'm going to walk you through this, and it's really, really important because it'll show why having a partisan commission that's really not independent but partisan leads to the problem that we have today. In 2021, the New York State Independent Redistricting was formed after the referendum was passed, and it held 2 rounds of public hearings. The IRC deadlocked because of this 5-5 composition, and they submitted 2 different versions of the maps to the legislature to approve, because in New York, the redistricting lines have to be approved by the state legislature. The legislature rejected the maps and sent it back to the IRC to submit new maps. In February 2022, the IRC did not send new maps, so the state legislature drew its own maps, which is the very thing that voters in 2014 did not want. They wanted an independent redistricting commission to draw the maps. But because the so-called independent commission really wasn't independent, then they couldn't agree because they deadlocked along party lines 5-5. So the legislature drew up its own maps, which Governor Hochul signed into law. Not surprising, in February 2022, then the Republicans sued. They did not like the maps that the majority Democratic legislature drew. Then, as a result of the lawsuit, a court found that the legislature, New York State legislature, could not create maps because the IRC process was not followed. The IRC never resubmitted maps, and so the process was not followed. IRC, so therefore the court appointed a special master to redraw the maps because there was not enough time for the IRC to redraw the maps before the 2022 congressional elections were going to take place. So the special master held public hearings to receive testimony on proposed lines and released a new map. Democrats then sued, stating that the special master's map was supposed to only be in effect for the 2022 congressional elections. Democrats argued that after the 2022 congressional elections, the IRC should redraw the maps before the next congressional election. Republicans argued, no, 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 the special master's map should remain in effect until after the 2030 census. While this lawsuit was pending, in November 2022, congressional elections took place using the lines that the special master drew. On December 12, 2023, just last year, just a couple of months ago, the Court of Appeals ruled that the IRC must redraw the congressional lines and send it to the legislature for approval by February 28th, this month, or this coming month, by February 28th. On December 15th, 3 days after the court ruled, 5 of the Democratic commissioners on the so-called Independent Redistricting Commission issued a memo. They said they will not hold any more public hearings and they would no longer receive written submissions on its portal. And that's why we're here today. Next slide.
Hello everyone, my name is Ikram Al-Rumaim. I'm a community building partner at Raising Health. Now that you have learned about New York redistricting process and you have learned that the IRC is not holding any hearings in the current lines, I'm here today to emphasize the critical importance of open and transparent redistricting in maintaining the integrity of our democracy. It's very important to acknowledge that the transparency is the cornerstone of a healthy democracy. So why transparency is crucial? Firstly, the IRC has never held public hearings in the current congressional lines and is not planning to hold any hearings while drafting the new congressional maps. The last time they held hearings was 2 years ago, on a map they couldn't even agree on. But they never held hearings in the current lines. Without the public input, the redistricting process lacks the diverse perspectives needed for fair representation. Secondly, the decisions made in redistricting stick around for an entire decade. It's not a month, a year or two, it's 10 years. These lines directly affect each and every one of us. It's not just some abstract political process. It shapes the representation and policies that impact our daily lives. Like Vijay highlighted in previous slides, it affects our healthcare system, foreign policy, how the government allocates resources, and many other factors that impact our lives. Therefore, we must actively engage with the redistricting process. It's crucial for us as a community to let the IRC know where our community is and why it should stay together. This ensures that the unique identity needs of our communities are considered during redistricting, promoting accurate representation and strengthening the democratic foundation at the local level. Drawing lines behind closed doors poses a significant threat to our democracy. We have seen examples in other states where decisions were made behind closed doors, for example, in Florida in 2015 and North Carolina in 2019. In 2015, Florida Supreme Court ruled that the state congressional districts were gerrymandered to favor certain political interests. So the court found that the lines were drawing with the intention of benefiting political parties in power and thereby they undermining the principle of fair representation. The redistricting process in Florida faced criticism for lacking openness as decisions were made without the public input. The closed doors nature of the decision-making process contributed to a lack of trust among citizens who felt excluded from a process that directly impacted their political representation. Similarly, in North Carolina, they were accused of favoring one political group while redrawing district lines. The decisions were also made behind closed doors, raising concerns about lack of transparency in this process. Critics argued that this lack of openness allowed political interest to dominate, potentially leading to unfair advantages for certain groups and reducing the representativeness of the electoral system. Both of these examples shows that when redistricting is not open and transparent, it can lead to problems like unfair advantages for some groups and less trust in the democratic system. Next slide, please. So as we look deeper into the importance of open redistricting, it becomes clear that it's not just about transparency, but also about accountability and legitimacy. Firstly, the public deserves to know the rationale behind the way districts lines are drawn. Transparent decision-making ensures that citizens understand the thought process behind these critical choices. Advocating for transparency is not just a right, but a responsibility. By doing so, we hold decision makers accountable for their actions, and this advocacy empowers the public to actively participate in this democratic process. Transparent process provide legitimacy to the outcome of redistricting, and this legitimacy in turn prevents endless litigation, creating a stable and reliable foundation for our democratic institutions. Being clear and open also helps everyone agree and trust the process. Therefore, having open and clear redistricting is extremely important. It protects democracy, makes sure people are represented properly, and creates system based on responsibility and legitimacy. Thank you, everyone. Pass it to the next slide, please.
Thank you, Akram, for presenting how critical it is for the IRC to have an open, transparent process and rebuild public trust. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sandra Choi with the Mingguan Center for Community Action in Queens. I want to start off by saying it is imperative that the IRC keep our communities of interest as whole as possible during this process. As this slide displays, Asian Americans share similar experiences and issues such as language accessibility, education and transportation, barriers to affordable healthcare and housing, immigrant histories, religion, and other socioeconomic factors that we've previously testified to over the past 4 years. Liz provided an excellent overview of our entire engagement in this process. Maintaining the current congressional lines maximizes the opportunity for our communities of interest to have their voices heard, their shared concerns and needs addressed, and to be civically empowered. In our coalition's own research of the Asian American community voter base in New York, we found that in the past 10 years, all but one of New York's 26 congressional districts have seen significant growth. That's every part of our big state. But as tonight's webinar will feature 6 of these congressional districts out of 26 that have been priorities for our members and make a case for why they need to be kept whole. Next slide, please. We start with Congressional District 5, which encompasses southeastern Queens and neighborhoods like Richmond Hill and South Ozone Park. Congressional District 5 is home to a significant South Asian and Indo-Caribbean community and anchored by places like Little Guyana, which stretches along a 30-block commercial corridor stretch on Liberty Avenue. It's also home to one of the largest Guyanese American populations in New York City as well. Next slide, please. Here we have Congressional District 6, home to New York's largest Asian American community with about a 46% Asian American voting age population. It stretches from central to northeastern Queens, encompassing more Asian ethnic communities than any other congressional district in New York, perhaps even the United States. From Little Manila on 70th Street and Roosevelt Avenue in Woodside to Bangladesh Street along 73rd Street and 37th Avenue in Jackson Heights to the Korean American community in Murray Hill, Queens, otherwise known as Mokja-Golmok. There are countless Asian ethnic communities in this one district. At its geographic center, you see the pinpoint there, is Flushing, Queens, which is home to the state and nation's largest Asian American community in that one city council district, City Council District 20, which overlaps with Congressional District 6. It has about a 70% Asian American voting population as well. Okay, next slide, please. Next, we feature Congressional District 9, which has the community of Kensington, Brooklyn. It's estimated to be home to about 1/3 of New York City's Bangladeshi community, And the community here is centered around McDonald Avenue. This area was renamed Brooklyn's Little Bangladesh in just last year in 2022. Next slide, please. Next, we feature Congressional District 10, which unites the Asian American communities of Chinatown and Lower East Side of Manhattan and Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Though separated by the East River, these two communities, especially the Chinese American population, share many similarities and histories, with many former residents of Manhattan resettling in the Sunset Park neighborhood. Over the past decade, the Asian American population in Brooklyn has grown over 300%. Next slide, please. Here we have Congressional District 11, which also unites two different boroughs, Staten Island and the southwestern tip of Kings County or Brooklyn. It encompasses communities like Bensonhurst and Diker Heights. Especially this area of Brooklyn has a significant Arab American and Chinese American population. Staten Island itself has experienced significant Asian American growth in the past decade. Next slide, please. Finally, we have the only borough we have not covered yet, the Bronx. Congressional District 14 is home to Bronx's Little Bangla, which is mostly around the Sterling Avenue commercial corridor in Parkchester, Bronx. Again, we want to emphasize how imperative it is for all of these communities of interest to be kept together during this redistricting process. Okay, pass it off to Liz.
Thank you, Sandra, for a great overview of where our communities of interest lie in New York City. So now that you learned what congressional redistricting is, why it's important, and where our communities of interest lie, and you know what's happening with our current independent redistricting commission, and the cry for it to be transparent and with public input. We'd like to hear from you. So if you could write in the chat, if the chat box can be open at the bottom of your screen, and we're going to go through one question at a time. So first, put in the chat what you think the ideal number of people should be on the commission. We currently have a 10-person commission. What do you think would be the ideal number of commissioners? Just to get a sense of what you think. Okay. Okay. Interestingly, people put in the chat an odd number. 2 people put in 5. That is interesting because when you have an odd number, you can't have a deadlock like we did. So that makes a lot of sense. You know, May put and other people put more than 5 and even more than 10. And you think, you know, like a city like New York City, there may be a need for more than 10 commissioners. And we'll talk about that, you know, why. But it is interesting that many of you chose an odd number, not one that would make it possible to end in a deadlock. So very interesting. And, you know, there are commissions across the state or this country that have a commission larger than 10, like California. So, you know, it is possible that you can have a commission with more than 10 people on it. Okay, that's helpful to get your thoughts. So now let's think about the next question. Who should decide who sits on the commission? So go to the next question and put in the chat, who do you think should decide who sits on the commission? Okay. Okay, someone said the board itself, but you got to get on that board. So which board are you talking about? Uh, some people said the people through a vote. That one people could argue would be the most democratic. If the people who can vote, if they are voters, if they're citizens, or you know, this is congressional, this is federal, so they have to be citizen to vote. Would be the most democratic. Is that likely that they would create an election for those to sit on the Independent Redistricting Commission? Maybe, maybe not, because of resources. So the issue really becomes who should sit on who should that those that sit on the commission should be independent. Because as we've seen in our current so-called Independent Redistricting Commission, it's not independent. The political parties very much have control. And that's why they deadlocked. That's why when one party's not happy, the other sues. And we are the beginning of 2024, and we're still dealing with 2020 redistricting because of the back and forth of the political parties. And who loses? We do. We, the community, are stuck in the middle. Every time this ball bounces to the other side and this party has a hearing, or this group has a hearing, and then it goes back to the courts orders a special master, they hold a hearing, we are bouncing back and forth. Our members on this commission have testified before this IRC and the special master 3 times already on congressional redistricting, not including assembly, etc. That's a problem. And so, you know, who should decide? And you can think of different ways in which that decision could come about. But the critical thing is that those who sit on that commission should be independent. They should not have political party ties, or else it's not going to be independent. Now, who should pick? That's a really interesting question, and it's a collaborative process. If there's going to be reform of the IRC, it's going to be a collaborative process. And in New York, you can't put a constitutional amendment on it just by yourself as an individual. The legislature, passes something, and then the public has to vote on it if it becomes part of our Constitution. So if we're going to reform the IRC, it's a collaborative process to get that reform in place. In different states around the country, sometimes it's a panel of judges who decides who sits on the commission. In other, like California, there's a neutral body who collects applications, and then they vet the applications, and then it goes through a process where the political parties can knock off people a certain number, and then the neutral body then chooses the commissioners from those that are remaining. In other places, it's totally randomized. You put into a computer system what are the qualities you want in the commissioner, et cetera, and then the computer randomizes the selection of people. So it really varies. But what the unifying thing of truly independent commissions are is, they take away the role of the legislator selecting who sits on the commission. So another person put in the chat a nominating process. And that is an interesting way to go about it too. One, where the candidates are nominated, and then there's a body that vets those that are nominated to make sure that they don't have any political ties, that they meet the basic requirements, etc. So there's different ways about creating it, but the underlying thing is that those who sit on the commission should be independent and have no conflict of interest with state legislatures. So let's go now to the third question. Who should be represented on the commission? Earlier, you guys put anywhere from 5 to over 10 commissioners should sit on a commission. Who should they represent? Who are these commissioners, and who should they represent? Want to put your answers in the chat and we can look at that? Who should these people on the commission represent? Absolutely agree. There needs to be more education, and that's why we're here today. And nearly 90 people on this call. That's wonderful. Okay, and so look at the responses. The people on this commission should represent the people, the community, different geographic areas, citizens of the district. You know, but the idea is different socioeconomic groups. They should represent the community and the people in that community. Different classes, assembly districts incorporated in there. And that then becomes the challenge. As big a state as New York State is, if you have 10 commissioners, if you have more than 10 commissioners, will they be able to represent the geographic areas of the state? Because they're different and they're diverse, right? You know, upstate, downstate, suburban, urban. You know, will those that are chosen, 11 people, can you get, for instance, 10 or more people who will fairly represent the different geographies in the state, as well as the different people, classes of people, protected categories of people under the Voting Rights Act, like language minorities, African Latinos, Asians, will you be able, if you have only a little bit more than 10 commissioners, be able to represent the diversity of a state like New York? And that then becomes the challenge. Will this commission be representative? Right now, you guys, there are 4 African Americans on the commission, 3 Latinos, and 3 white. No Asian American on this commission, despite the fact that Asian Americans constitute more than 11% of New York's population. That's an issue. So, June put in maybe 2 commissions, upstate and downstate. There's a wide variety of ways of looking at this issue, but a commission that is based on population largely, right? Like redistricting, as Lloyd said, how many districts, congressional districts a state gets depends if their population has increased or decreased and how big it is. And so, can you get a commission that fairly represents the different geographies, the different populations, the different classes of people? And so that becomes an issue. Okay, and let's now go to the fourth question. What makes a redistricting process accessible to the public? Think about that. If you want a fair and open and transparent independent redistricting commission, what would that look like? What would make it accessible to the public? Public hearings? Okay, what else? What would make it accessible? Open forums for discussion of process. Involve the citizens in the process. Open meetings, enough time, opportunity to testify. Testimony can be seen and heard by all. Lots of information in the news to get people out. Being accessible through community involvement, community outreach, language accessibility, transparency, variety of different languages, translation in community centers, easy to find out how to make a statement or comment, but most people don't know how to submit testimony to the commission. Very, very true. All those things are so critical, right? Because for all the things that Vishal mentioned, redistricting, which happens every 10 years, impacts our communities on the most basic of levels: healthcare, housing, war, etc. If they're going to make decisions that's going to impact our communities should be able to weigh in. And so it's so critical that this process be open, like Ekram said. You know, there has to be a way for there to be public input, whether it be public hearings, it could be online public hearings, it could be hybrid public hearings, a way to submit testimony in writing in order to weigh in, and making their information language accessible. You're so right, Tom. So many people don't even know that the Court of Appeals ordered the IRC to redraw the congressional lines. In English, a lot of people don't know that. Just imagine how many people who don't speak English knows about this critical court decision that has resulted in now the redrawing of congressional lines. So very, very critical, all really important things that would make an independent redistricting commission accessible. Thank you. Now let's go to the next slide. Okay, now, thank you for sharing your responses. We hope what our panelists have shared so far and your participation has sparked even more curiosity in your minds. If you would like, please go to the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. And if you have any questions about the redistricting process, we'll take some questions now. So take a few minutes. If you have any questions, we will love to entertain them. Many times, as these webinars, as you know, will provide basic information, but more people listening get more out of responses to their own questions. So take a second, please. And if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A, and we will try to respond as many as we can before we move on to the most important part yet to come. Take your time to put in questions. Excellent. May asks, there's a deadline coming up on February 28th. That's correct. The court ordered the IRC to submit their new maps to the state legislature for approval by February 28th. The best is yet to come. Mohammed Amin is going to talk about what we can do. So hold on to that question, May. That's a good question. Okay. Thomas asks, is it a goal of yours to keep these 6 districts of interest maintained as is, or to keep certain neighborhoods together? We are supporting that the communities of interest that Sandra laid out be kept together. Our coalition likes the special master's map, that the one that the court ordered the special master to draw. We like that one. But if they could draw another map that keeps our neighborhoods, communities of interest together even better, we would consider that. And so the most important thing is to keep our communities of interest together, because like John Park said, if you're divided, then no matter how many times you vote, your vote won't matter because you are outnumbered by people who think differently. And so it's important to keep communities of interest who have similar issues and concerns together so they can vote similarly on issues. Okay. Isaiah wants to know what the redistricting task force is and why it's important. John, you want to take that question? John? John? Can you hear? John, can you begin to speak? I'll mute myself.
Liz, we can't hear John. Maybe in the interest of time, you can explain it.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not sure why John can't come on, but John Park opened this webinar explaining who the APA Voice Redistricting Task Force is. We are the largest redistricting task force in the state of New York, APA, Asian Pacific American Redistricting Task Force. We are composed of nonprofit organizations, and our goal is to make sure that APAs have a voice in the redistricting process, that our communities of interest are kept together, and that the process is transparent. In other words, we want public hearings. And if the commission is going to redraw the maps, we want to see what their draft looks like. And we want to be able to have an opportunity to comment on their map before they submit it to the legislature for approval. So that's very, very critical. Okay, another question from Ms. Ocampo. If there is one district that the whole AAPI community should focus our efforts to make a change in, what district requires the most support? With respect to congressional redistricting, unlike state Senate, state assembly, city council, APA members, with the exception of what Sandra outlined in Congressional District 6, our numbers are not as large to form a majority APA congressional district. Congressional District 6 is very much approaching that. It's a very, very strong um, uh, uh, plurality. But so that means that all the districts are very important because our populations are growing. And so we want to keep them together so they can make a difference. Sandra, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you captured it perfectly. I think we've seen growth in almost all but one of New York's 26 congressional districts of the Asian American population. But Liz is right, we don't have a majority yet, we just have a plurality in some certain districts.
Okay. And Isabel, the reason why it happens every 10 years is because it's based on the census. Redistricting is based on the census. And the census, the population count of everybody who lives in this country, is done every 10 years. And so then they look at the census results, and if a state has gained population, they get more of those 435 House of Representatives seats that Lloyd talked about. If they have lost population, they get less of those 435 seats. You know, so New York, unfortunately, steadily has lost congressional seats because our population is shrinking. 2020 census was so complicated because so many people with COVID or with COVID going on didn't complete the census. And you remember then President Trump tried to put a citizenship question on the census, and that created a chill factor among people completing the census. And so we already know that the census numbers is an undercount. And so, you know, it becomes more problematic. But the census is the number one government survey on which so many decisions are based, including redistricting. And so it happens every 10 years. And we focused this webinar on congressional redistricting because that's what the court ordered the IRC to do. But every 10 years, it's not just congressional redistricting that's done. State Senate seats, assembly seats, city council seats are all done every 10 years. Okay, we're going to take one more question before we get to the heart of what is it that you can do. One more question. Is there one more question? Okay. Sabrina, very good question. APA Voice, because its member organizations are predominantly in New York City, we have not focused outside of New York City. That's a good question. We have not. Okay.
Liz, if I can just
yes.
Liz,
Go
if
ahead.
I can just say, they're the second largest Asian American community congressional district-wise is Congressional District 3, which encompasses northeastern Queens and Nassau County. There's a special election for it happening next month. So please check if you live in the district, and please make sure you vote in the special election. Again, it's Congressional District 3 if you live in northeastern Queens or stretching into Nassau County.
Good point. APA Voice, which is the umbrella organization which the redistricting task force falls under, has been more involved in elections and getting out the vote and making sure that they're fair beyond New York City. But as far as our task force on redistricting goes, we have not largely gone beyond New York City. So thank you for making that clarification, Sandra. Okay. Okay. All right, so let's move on. Those were great questions. And those are many of the things that we are dealing with right now. So we need your support. Okay, Mo?
Thank you, Liz. Hi, everyone. My name is Mohammed Q. Amin. I'm the founder and executive director of the Caribbean Equality Project. Liz outlined what reforms are needed to the Independent Redistricting Commission to fairly represent our communities. Let's discuss what you can do now to get involved, including participating in the upcoming People's Hearing. APA Voice Redistricting Task Force is a part of another coalition headed by Common Cause, the Civic Engagement Table, and other good government groups and community organizations to demand transparency in the Independent Redistricting Commission process. If the Independent Redistricting Commission does not hold public hearings for the congressional redistricting process, members of this coalition will hold a people's hearing, which you can participate in to have your voices heard. Here are other things you can do now to get involved. Organize educational community town halls to educate community members on the importance of redistricting and its impact on their neighborhoods. Create educational campaigns and promote them on social media. We know that social media is a vital opportunity to reach communities digitally. Leverage that resource to reach your supporters. People partner with faith-based institutions to educate worshipers. We know that our communities are gathering in these spaces to celebrate holidays and pray weekly. Leverage this opportunity hyper-locally to reach seniors, religious leaders, young people, and families. Create community educational materials for outreach and incorporate redistricting in all aspects of your community engagement, such as food distributions, upcoming Lunar New Year community festivals and celebrations, religious celebrations, Know Your Right workshops, and other programs that your organization may lead. Write an op-ed on the importance of open and inclusive redistricting process for ethnic media. For those with writing skills and knowledge on the issue, lean on your connections to media outlets to amplify our voices for transparency, equity, and representation. Hold educational forums for college students and educators. As we've learned tonight, these congressional lines will impact young people and all of our communities for the next 10 years. Use this opportunity to engage the next generation on this issue to get young people more involved. Provide education on an inclusive redistricting process at voter registration drives. As you engage and mobilize voters to participate in the upcoming 2024 election, keep redistricting in your conversations with community members. Convene educational spaces for small businesses and small business owners. We're 4 years into the COVID-19 pandemic. Our small businesses are still recovering and struggling to keep their doors open. Educate your local business owners on how these congressional lines will impact resources for their businesses. Next slide, please. We need you to take action now. That's right. We've gotten to the point of our presentation and our webinar tonight where you get to be more involved in this process. Please take a moment to complete the APA Voice volunteer form to demand transparency and public input in the 2024 congressional redistricting process. You can scan the QR code or click the link shared in the chat. I believe Wanjia is in the process of sharing the link in the chat, so you may have access to that as well. Thank you, Wanjia, for dropping the link in the chat. We appreciate it. In the coming weeks, we'll have more information about the People's Hearing, which is being planned now and is scheduled in February. Please fill out the form. Next slide, please. Here is a list of resources to expand your redistricting knowledge. The APA Voice produced a powerful documentary titled "This is Where We Draw the Line" to curate our task force redistricting advocacy. Follow our journey on YouTube. You can look at this documentary at bit.ly/APA-Voice/This is Where We Draw the Line. I highly encourage all of our community members to look at this documentary. It really outlines the work we've done, the communities we're fighting for, and how we've been gerrymandered in the redistricting process. Learn more about our coalition's work by visiting www.apavoice.org. .org. I know we've shared a lot of information tonight, but you can still, if you still have questions, connect with us on social media. Follow and like APA Voice New York on Facebook, Instagram, now X, and also X, formerly Twitter, and share your comments. We want to hear from you. We know our time with you is going to end shortly, but it doesn't mean the conversation we're having